Welcome to Your Anxious Child, 5-Minute Solutions, a podcast dedicated to providing practical advice and support for parents of anxious children. This advice is informational in nature and not a substitute for a consultation with a licensed mental health professional. And now, here's your host, Dr. Edward Plimpton.
Welcome back to Your Anxious Child, 5-Minute Solutions and Interviews with Experts. Today, we are talking with Dr. Mari Swingle, who has written a groundbreaking book, iMinds, How and Why Constant Connectivity is Rewiring Our Brains and What to Do About It. And when did she write this groundbreaking book? Back in 2013. And essentially everything that the book has conveyed is holding true today. And so I am delighted to have a chance to talk with Dr. Swingle. Perhaps you should just, introduce yourself a little bit more for our audience.
Okay. All right. Well, I think especially in this topic, it's important to ground in our own backgrounds. So I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm in the trenches on the ground, working with children, adolescents, and youth. Or at least I was, shall we say, 30 years ago when I first started looking into these phenomena. So a lot of my original research was completely grounded in clinical practice, what I was literally seeing across the clinic floor. And I worked extensively with children with learning disabilities, learning disorders, and behavioral issues. And, people have heard me say this before, not to pound my chest, but I was pretty successful. I had a really, really good track record. And then I would say in the early 2000s or so, and then getting progressively more noticeable, there were certain profiles where the therapy wasn't working as well. So essentially, we would have children who would come in, we'd do the therapy. I like to say they'd go off into the sunset skipping, and then they'd be back in 3 months, and all the symptoms had returned. There was a second grouping probably around a year later or so where we were doing the therapy, and it just wasn't working. We didn't get any treatment effect whatsoever. And, to cut a long story short, all of the epiphany bells soon went off. These were all young male children who at the time were essentially engaging with gaming extensively. And that group was the canary in the coal mine. And that's what really, really started my research 2005 to 2009.
So you bring to this whole topic a complementary but slightly different kind of lens in which you're an expert on neurofeedback and EEGs. And I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit to kind of help our audience understand that the brain is not just a chemical event, but an electrical event, and that you can learn certain things by looking at that side of the kind of equation that is kind of unique and generally has something to offer.
Yeah. So I talk about lenses. Okay. If we look through the pharmaceutical lens, they're always looking at the brain as a chemical instrument. But if we look in deeper through another lens, the brain is 100% electrical. So we all talk about brain waves. That's a bit of a colloquialism. A brain wave is an electrical frequency. So, for example, the brain wave theta is 3 to 7 hertz. So very slow undulation, and generally speaking, it's associated with quiet and calm. But before I get too far ahead of myself, the brain waves and the synapses are what create the chemical events. Okay. So it's a matter of what lens. Everybody's correct, whether you talk about the brain as a chemical instrument or an electrical instrument, but it's kind of like chicken and egg. The electrical comes comes first because the electrical causes the chemical. But this is probably a very, very good segue in terms of when we're talking about not just children, but all individuals. You want the correct brainwave in the correct region governing what it's supposed to govern. So going back to that theta wave, you want a lot of slow activity in the occiput, the back of the brain, the region of the brain that is predominantly responsible for quieting. Okay. If you have a lot of that slow activity over the central motor cortex, and that's the region where you tend to want a little bit more fast activity for focus, that's your classic ADHD signature. Now, if we flip that and you don't have enough of that slow activity in the back of the brain, instead you have too much beta, which is 16 to 25 hertz, a very fast undulation, a faster brainwave, um, that's associated with anxiety in the back of the brain. But again, if you have some nice beta over the central region, that's your focus. So that's just a really good example about how you want the right waves, the right dominance, the right ratios, the right amplitudes in the regions that they're supposed to be governing. So that in a bubble is what neurotherapy is all about. It's about looking at where the brain waves are, how strong they are on their own compared to the other brain waves. So this is where I was talking about amplitude and ratio. And we literally work to help an individual modulate or make those brain waves more efficient. So, for example, with a child with very, very classic ADHD, we work to bring down the slow wave activity in regions where it should not be dominant. Conversely, with anxiety, we want to bring up the slow waves to quiet a person. I can literally go on um,
Uh,
for days on
Okay,
this.
so
That's the general. Yeah.
okay, looking at kind of an EEG, um, tell us about the kind of clinical kind of significance of kind of EEG findings. I mean, let me just kind of phrase it in kind of
Yeah.
the skeptic's voice for a second.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Go for it.
yeah. You got this little glitch in your brain, okay? And you report, like in your dissertation, 77% of those with internet a gaming addiction had some dysfunction in their EEG
Mhm.
um, pattern. And okay, they've got that. Is that really clinically significant in any way?
Yes, because it
I mean,
was
just
that 77%. This is where we have to go into the statistics. Nothing wrong with a little variation. I always like to joke, Einstein's brain sure as heck was not normal. Okay, so there's good
right,
variation as well. Um, but my cutoff was 2 standard deviations out. So, most of the data I present, I don't present any fluff. I present the strong stuff,
right.
very, very, notable. Yeah.
Mhm. So, so when you see these things, these patterns with the EEG,
Mhm.
um, to put it simply, they're really quite significant.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And in kind of neurofeedback or neurotherapy, um, how do you alter? How do you help somebody recognizing these patterns? What do you do to, kind of help correct an imbalanced kind of pattern of brain activity?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you need to do an assessment and you need to get a baseline. There are 2 ways to do this. One is we can use normative databases. And that's where you compare an individual's brain to somebody without anxiety, without depression, without ADHD, without schizophrenia, without addiction, on and on we go. Okay. The other is using a normative database, and it's exactly the opposite. You compare a person's brain to people with ADHD, with anxiety, with depression, etc. I put my bias right on the table. I love working with normative databases sorry, complete correct, um, clinical databases and helping to pull a person away from the clinical. My rationale is very clear. And I already made my Einstein joke, okay? Normative is a melting pot. Who the heck wants to be normal? Okay? So this is where I'm very, very biased towards clinical databases. There are some really unique variants that we don't want to take out, especially with children. And this is where I start to talk about epigenetics. There are certain markers that are very, very unique that can be devastating or brilliance. And this again can be in the classification of hyperarousal. When I remember when I was talking about a lot of beta going around, it can be associated with absolute genius or completely dysfunctional anxiety. Okay. Um, Conversely, if we kind of look at, I'm in Vancouver, so we reference the downtown east side a lot here. So unfortunately, many, many individuals with very, very severe drug issues. Okay. I actually volunteered in that community for 3 months. Oh my gosh, 15, 20 years ago, a long time ago, and mapped brains. Every single person had this very, very specific signature. Guess what? Every single elite, and I mean elite athlete also has it, okay? This hyper aroused brain, okay? It's a busy, busy brain and it needs something to do, okay? So when an adolescent is in high school, they've got this hook in the water, I like to say, okay? And does that hook catch drugs or does that hook catch swimming? Okay. And swimming is a really good example. What adolescent gets up at 3 a.m. every single morning to be in the pool at 4:15 to do their practice and then be at school at 9? That's an addiction. Okay.
Right.
But it's also elitism. So this is my point. You want to be really careful what you train out. So if we get neurotherapy in schools and we see the addiction profile and we wipe all that out, you gotta be really, really careful. And here I'm also gonna go get on my soapbox. I'm a true believer in 100% transparency. Neurotherapy has a huge problem in that it is not a regulated practice. So anybody can go out, take a weekend workshop, buy $20,000 worth of equipment, learn how to press some buttons, hang a shingle, and call themselves a neurotherapist. That to me is not neurotherapy. Okay. So obviously you can come to the Swingle Clinic. We know what we're doing. Okay. But anybody that you go to see, you want to make sure that they have the proper complementary competence. So MD, PhD, etc., and that they know all of their EEG, meaning they need to be able to read the raw brain waves, interpret them. AI is not there yet. You cannot have computer systems do this for you. And there are a lot of people selling equipment that say, oh, you don't need to know what you're doing. Just push a button. The algorithm will do it for you. Run as fast as you can from anybody that cannot tell you in lay people's terms what they're doing and why they're doing it. And generally speaking, every single person, you're going to be doing something slightly different. Sure, there are classifications, depression, ADD. There are regions that we look at. Sure. Okay. But there is variation in all of us, just the way some of us are tall, some of us are short, some of us are wide, some of us are thin, blue eyes, brown skin, white skin, all of this. The same variations happen in the brain. And, you put somebody like me out in the sun, I'm burnt in a nanosecond. Okay. Somebody with beautiful olive skin, they can be out in the sun for 45 minutes, no issue. Right. So, same thing with the brain. If you deal with a brain that's sun sensitive, you're going to burn it versus somebody else. So that's my big lecture. And now we can get back to other questions. But it's imperative to mention that because neurotherapy is becoming more and more popular. And it seems like there's a new neurotherapy practice on every corner.
Yeah. Well, um, in reading your book, um, I certainly came away with a sense of um, slight intimidation about the kind of level of knowledge that's kind of required in order to kind of do it and the intricacies
Mhm.
of, it's not just increasing one type of alpha or whatever. It's quite complex.
Yeah.
So, but
It's
in
your
any
brain.
case, right? Okay, so in any case, um, one of the reasons I was very eager to kind of talk to you is because I thought you had a very kind of interesting explanation and perspective on a common everyday experience that parents across the globe are having
Mhm,
when it comes to getting their child off of their screen-based technology.
mhm, mhm,
And so often, parents are reporting it. It's really hard. That
mhm.
dismount, gets leads to a lot of arguments,
Yeah,
and that often the child after they get off is kind of a mess.
yeah.
And I wonder if you could kind of give us kind of a perspective about that. And before you do, I think I want you to kind of just say few words about the vestibular system, you
Mhm.
know, to kind of set the groundwork.
Okay.
Dr. Swingle has a very interesting phrase called a vestibular lock-in.
Yeah.
But before she gets to that, I think we need to have a little bit of a broader sense of the vestibular system and kind of all it does.
Okay. So, when we talk about the vestibular system, vestibular system 101, everybody talks about the inner ear and balance. Absolutely accurate, but it's much, much broader than that. The vestibular system arguably is responsible for all sensory input. So whether it's the eyes, hearing, even let's say goosebumps on the skin, all of that, the vestibular gets all this input, and then the central nervous system interprets it and tells us how to feel and how to behave. Okay. Um, Before I go further as well, it's very important to note that the vestibular system develops essentially from birth to around age 9. There's variation. So in terms of, when a little baby is learning how to crawl, okay, that's about the balance. And then a toddler, they're learning how to climb a little bit and jump. They're learning about the balance and the world. When kids get a little bit older, most parents, kind of smile when they remember this phase. They love being upside down. Okay. Whether it's on couches or chairs, monkey bars are obvious. Okay. Swinging and being lifted and flipped and all of that. That's all about the vestibular system. There's all of this input. They're learning about balance, they're learning about danger, and it's all this sensory input literally coming from the outside world. And it's teaching coordination, balance, and very importantly, safety, fear. So, attention, arousal, safety, survival. Okay. So, a little kid kind of balancing on the edge of a sofa, okay, or walking on their bed. That's all about the balance. So when they're 25 and, hiking and they have to go across the ridge, their body has all this information, their brain has all this information, and they know how fast to go, how slow to go, and when they're in real danger and really have to pay attention. Okay. All of this is being fed. So that's essentially quote unquote it in the vestibular
Well,
system.
but also you're forgetting, or for the moment, that it's the primary way that parents calm babies is by swinging.
Soothing, soothing, you bet,
Yeah,
100%.
yeah.
And this is probably the perfect well, yeah, how do we segue? I have probably 99 things I want to say right now, but I'll start with one. Um, when children are in front of us, so we talk about arousal and attention. Okay, so one of the reasons why kids love playing so much is the arousal they get is just fantastic. And then the amount of attention that's needed to not be in danger. That's always being interpreted and part of the learning. So when we're in front of a screen, um, many children, in the screen in terms of depending on the program, the amount of information coming in tends to be rather extensive. So everybody thinks about one little character moving on a screen, but there tends to be many other things shifting, whether it's sound, whether it's a bing or a ding, or the music that's behind the bing or the ding, the shifts in color, all of this type of information. So essentially, there's so much information coming in that the child really, really, really has to focus, and they're at the limits of their attention. So that's where the system essentially shrinks in and directs, because the child can't pay attention to all of those things unless they're in that hyper focus at the limit of attention. Okay. And this is where I start to talk about the lock in, that the child cannot process any other information and still pay attention. So this is where I start to talk about, if a parent calls them, the child literally will not hear. Okay. You can even wave in front of a child's face. They will not notice the hand, because they're so locked into um, the screen. So this is where I start to call this vestibular lock-in, because you'll notice the children are very, very still, generally speaking, when this has happened. And as you said, there might be a slight rocking, but that tends to be about it. The mood is also artificially calmed or quieted. Okay. So essentially, there's this concentration. I'm going to digress a little bit as well, but a lot of what the child is doing on the screen as well, they're not learning anything. They're not learning respect for safety. They're not learning respect for danger. Okay, so essentially, you're locking in a system that's designed for learning, but the child isn't actually learning something.
So in front of a screen,
Mhm.
you have, it's coming at you, you know, in such a way that in order to kind of play and keep up with it, you have to basically shut down other systems.
Exactly.
Um, so that's why apparently at Las Vegas, every once in a while, people in front of video slot machines forget to go to the bathroom,
Yep.
and apparently from time to time they have to take the chairs outside to kind of air them out and kind of clean them.
Yeah, and it's the
Uh,
same thing, with children. You'll notice when your child is engaged on the screen, they're not hungry. Okay.
right.
And in extreme cases, we even see, urinary tract infections and bladder infections, etc., because children learn to hold their urine for horrible amounts of time. Also, certain forms of constipation. I can go on and on in terms of the extremes, but in most households, the mood becomes artificially stabilized. um, the repression of hunger, the repression of generalized body function, even the eyes, people don't blink as much. All of this, essentially, things get shut down. Now, where it becomes really interesting is when the parent eventually does succeed in getting the child off of the screen. What happens? The child absolute tantrums, okay? This is a rebooting of the system, okay? So essentially, the child has been highly, highly engaged. Everything has been repressed. And then they're off the system, and they're literally in absolute stimuli silence, because nothing in the actual environment is at the level of attention that was required for the screen engagement. Okay. And so they also become emotionally deregulated because the emotions come back online. Okay. An example that I think I had in the book that most parents know, in terms of, that long, wonderful day at the beach or the pool. And the child is go, 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 and then crash. And I say the lucky parents, their kids fall asleep. The unlucky parents, the kids are they're moody, they're grumpy, they're screaming, they're tantruming. That's essentially the need for the reset. So it does happen in natural environments too.
I think another analogy you used was it's like somebody has yanked a lollipop right out of your mouth, and there's just a void there. I think
Yeah.
you used
Yeah,
um,
that's an example. I'm not sure it's a strong enough one. I think
right.
the other one that I like to use is most of us were foolish enough in our youth to go to these amazing concerts and that the volume and the lights and the concert is over and you're out in the parking lot or whatnot after and it's just you've got this ringing in your ears and it's like dead silence. Okay. So that's an experience a lot of people have had as well. Now, I would say in terms of live experience, generally speaking, we can get some form of satisfaction from that. But in terms of a lot of the things that we do online, the void remains because it's a pretty constant event versus a concert. You know, you went once a month, once every 3 or 6 months, right? So it was not destabilizing on a cyclical basis. Yeah. I think the other one, and we're going there, I think it's very important not to just critique, but to also give parents some advice on this is that when your child is on a screen for a certain amount of time, you have to throw them out in a park or a backyard and have them run around and reboot. Very, very important when they're young. Okay, so you want that instead of the tantrum. Um,
So
but as children get older, they completely lose that ability to reboot. And that's where you essentially have the grumpy teenager that has no idea of what to do. They have no way of entertaining themselves because nothing, and I mean nothing, is engaging as a screen. So they're moody and angry and bored. Okay.
so um, so the quick thing that the parents can do, as kind of first aid,
Yeah.
is get that child doing something physical.
Yep.
Yeah,
Mhm.
intensely involving the kind of body.
Yeah.
Um, important point.
Yeah.
Um, I'd like to backtrack because I think you also made some very important points in looking at screen-based technology with regard to arousal cycles
Hmm.
and um, and the type of arousal cycles that screen-based technology creates and what is natural for our biology. And I wonder if you
Hmm.
could just kind of talk about that because I think that's an important part of some of the kind of points you've been making.
Yeah. So in the real world or embodied experience, okay, it's an arousal cycle, literally a cycle. So essentially, um, we start to become aroused, we get to a peak, and we're either satisfied or not satisfied, and down we go. It's very, very healthy. Okay. And what screens do essentially is they bring you up and always just leave you there. So when you disengage, there's no curvature.
Hmm.
Okay. And this is also where I start to look at anticipatory cycles. Now, I think I need some new examples because only people, I would say over 50 or 60 now know what the heck I'm talking about. Um, but in terms of, good old fashioned snail mail, when you were waiting for a letter, okay, and essentially the post arrived at 4 o'clock every day. So you have the cycle go up. Uh, the mail person is coming. The mail person is coming. Yay, the mail person is coming. Or I'm running home to check my mailbox. Yay, yay, yay. Up you go. The moment of opening the mailbox, it's like, yay, I got my letter. And you come down or go up and you open the mailbox. Oh, my letter isn't there. And you go down. Okay.
Hmm.
But the cycle completes and you don't stay in this crazy hyper arousal because there's no point because the next opportunity for the mail to come is until 4. So you essentially go up and you come down and then slowly, slowly come around. And I don't know, at 2 p.m., 3, 4, up you go. So it's a healthier cycle. Okay. In terms of email or text, it can come at any moment. Okay. And your anticipation is constant. It's absolutely constant all the time, waiting, waiting. And for a lot of individuals, and I'm going to use adolescents, for example, um, you know, somebody is, waiting for a response and they don't get it. And it's like, oh no, are they ignoring me? Oh, is this the beginning of ghosting? Oh, do they not like what I say, etc. Okay, there's no, because there's no appropriate temporal sequencing in which we can be satisfied. If you want to play a game with me, it's one that
Yeah.
I love to do at my presentations because it just says everything. Okay,
Okay.
so there's two parts to the game. This is the first part. Kindly ask me any question whatsoever.
What did you have for lunch? Excuse me? What did you have for lunch? Mm. Mm,
Okay, I'll stop here. So now I'm going to ask our viewers to go back and see what Dr. Plimpton did. Okay, so he asked the question and his face was bright. I didn't respond. Okay, confusion. Okay, he repeated the question. Okay. And then you had all the appropriate then you realize, okay, something's off. Your eyes kinda went like this, and your jaw kinda like all okay.
uh-huh.
So, something's kinda wrong in the interaction. Okay. Now, kindly ask me another question.
Um, who's your favorite author?
Ah, sorry. My favorite author is okay. So, we were dealing with the exact same amount of silence, but you could essentially see that, I don't know, my throat was dry and I needed some water. I was giving you these signs. So, you were happy to wait because you knew what was going on. There wasn't something wrong in the communication system. I wasn't being mean or nasty. Okay. But my point is, when you're dealing with text and a lot of communication, the expectation now is that you're going to get an immediate response. And if you don't get an immediate response, then something is wrong. Okay. And it's extremely destabilizing, especially for youth. And this is where you get these constant chats, and it really usually has nothing to do with the content of the chats. It's about the security of the relationship. So each of those circles, you're reinforcing the security of the relationship, right? And I mean, I can't say that this is anything new. If you look at, sweethearts in the 1970s, or maybe even now, it's like at the end of a phone call, I love you. I love you too. You hang up. No, you hang up. Those
Mhm.
type of things. So, I mean, this is natural human behavior. But now it's on steroids. So, a lot of the reasons why we experience anxiety, it's because a lot of the rules of the natural world are still within our base physiology, but the technology hijacks our physiology for the negative, not the positive. So if we go back to the vestibular system, again, the sequence is attention, arousal, safety, survival, you know, fun and learning, fun and fear. And then, as we mature a little bit more, it's nausea. And when the system is aroused, it's just fear. Okay. Embodied experience. Again, when you test the vestibular system, et cetera, in embodied experience, you're always learning. Online, you're not learning anything. So you don't have respect for the fear and danger. And then what we were talking about in terms of the communication systems, um, we don't get there's not enough feedback in the loop for our emotional systems to feel safe. So we
Mhm.
do not feel safe unless we have these constant loops. And this is where I cry out to parents, in terms of um, talk with other parents within your children's social circle. I highly suggest that all parents agree that between, I don't know, 5 and 6 on Wednesdays, all the kids can chat, but it's, 6 o'clock, the phone goes dead. So nobody is worrying about anything. Nobody is missing out on anything. Nobody's not in the loop the next day at school. And all the kids can relax and have some playtime and some fun time with parents, etc.
You're making me wanna just kind of go back a bit because you're talking in your book about how constant connectivity is rewiring our brain.
Hmm.
So when we get these kind of school-age children, um, constantly engaged, with screen-based technology, um, can we say what's happening to their brain?
Yeah, where do
Um,
you start?
well, I think, then one of the things you kind of suggest is you're training them to be hyper aroused and training them to develop an intolerance of mundane and
Mhm. Yeah.
boring things.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. So essentially, when you gamify school, okay, you're raising the arousal template. So, I mean, the good news here is if you make learning entertaining, the child pays more attention. Okay, we've known that for years. So on the surface, it's very positive. So 60s, 70s, 80s, up to the 1990s, I would even say, if you had an engaging teacher, that was fantastic, as opposed to the person. Okay. Um, but then there's an upper limit. If you have a teacher who's always coming in costume, or I would say even, primary school teachers who would just give away tons and tons and stickers. It's kind of like the engagement reward uh, supersedes. So there's no we call about intrinsic and extrinsic learning. So there's essentially no learning drive without the entertaining component. And if you look at the majority of life and things that we need to learn, most things are really, really, really boring and hard until the skill clicks.
Mhm.
Okay. And what we're doing when we gamify in the classroom is we're just giving tons and tons of reward. So skill doesn't necessarily click in, rote memory does. But more importantly, you're teaching the child to not be able to pay attention on the more normal or mundane aspects of life. I mean, I hate to say it, but most of life is la, 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 la. Can be pretty boring. And then you get these occasional cycles of excitement and these occasional real downs. That's pretty standard. But if you teach a child to only respond to exciting, 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 and of course, it's going to need to be more and more and more exciting to not only be interested, uh, but to not only engage, but to be merely interested. So this is your ADHD connection. Yeah. The other, I
And that,
think, mhm.
so would you say that, children who are struggling with ADHD and other sort of attentional issues that screen-based technology, um, is really dangerous because,
Makes
they what?
makes it worse. Period. Right.
Um,
And I talk about neurological ADHD versus environmental ADHD. So neurological is kind of pure genetic with an environmental trigger. Okay. And environmental, there's no genetic whatsoever. It's just 100% environmental, meaning you train the brain to not be able to pay attention unless something is outrageously arousing. And again, there are limits. Like how far can we go? Yeah.
it's really challenging for parents with kind of children with attentional issues because those games are so attractive, and so compelling, and they seem to superficially focus.
Yep, and they do. But this is where for any family that has a backyard, meaning you don't live in an apartment, okay, or you live in a region where you're comfortable sending a group of children together. Usually, children in groups are very, very safe. Okay, um, uh, just send them outside to discover, to be curious, to do all kinds of experiments. I mean, traditional play is all about experimentation. Um, I'm going to backtrack a little bit though, because I think this is very important in terms of school and what I call gamification, or with using screen tools to teach. One of the issues is it thwarts true analytical thinking, and thwarts the creation of accumulated knowledge, or what I call wisdom, through the lifespan. And the reason for that is when something is presented in a game format, you get rewards when something is correct. Okay, so it over time, the child stops being interested in getting, um, shall I say, the correct answer. They're only interested in getting the reward. So they're responding to the ding or the bing. So they're not interested in true scientific or true education. Is something possible or not possible? Okay. So, the true three ways possible, um, right, wrong, possible. Okay. It's only the bifurcation of right or wrong. So it completely thwarts um, curiosity. Okay.
Mhm.
And another is, once a child gets an answer, on they go. And if they're constantly on a screen, there are no blank spaces in which to integrate information. And that's how you collect knowledge and wisdom. It's the ability to integrate and assimilate information, pattern recognition, etc. So on the surface, children seem much, much more intelligent than my generation because they can rattle off all this information, but there's this lack of ability to connect the dots.
You were one of the first people to really raise concern about developing screen-based technology. I mean, your book was back in what, the first edition was 2013?
Mhm, mhm.
So so now, what, um, what strikes you about what's happened in the past, 20, kind of 20 years? Or, what, what part has been a good, "I told you so, folks," or something like that, about, um
Well, when I
or
first
what's changed or remained the same?
Yeah. Well, awareness. I really like the awareness now. When I first started to lecture, people were like just jaw dropped. Okay. And then over time, people slowly started nodding. Okay.
Mhm.
Um, and then I would say there was this real fear component, um, where parents really, really did not have control. And unfortunately, this turned into apathy. It's like, what can we do? The school swallowed the Kool-Aid. And unfortunately, a lot of quote unquote curriculum developers, no, they were tech pushers. Okay. By the way, this is a really good time to interject. I usually say this at the beginning. I am not anti-technology, not by any stretch of the imagination. We were formerly talking about neurotherapy. It's all technological computer feedback loops, okay? There is a place for it in our society. It advances so many things, and there's so many realms in which it is so, so, so positive. It's a godsend. Okay. But it's also an absolute curse when it's not used appropriately. I also believe that having screens in the schools carefully thought out is very, very appropriate. Okay. The problem is it's not being thought out. And I'm going to be horribly biased. I think in our teacher education, we're doing a horrible job. I think it's just like what happened with the pharmaceutical company. You had all these pretty people offering doctors trips to Hawaii, this, that, and the other, pushing the pills. There is a place for pharmacology, okay, but not the way a lot of it is being pushed. So it's the exact same thing with technology. So technology should be used to enhance or add to. It should be a complement, not an override. And this is what parents now are completely aware of, that their children are living in the override. So by all means, if you have a teenager, texting away to meet and go for a movie or something, that's great. Okay. But if you're just texting all the time, in this loop or Snapchatting or I don't know, it changes every 3 months, then that all you're doing is playing with the arousal template. And that's very, very negative. Yeah. Um, Again, I literally, the second edition, I have it here. I mean, it's kind of thick,
Uh-huh.
right? There's a lot of information in it. And it's not all bad. And even when I first started looking, oh, I'm gonna forget the name. Oh, no, Community Planet, as in Plan It. It was a lovely pun. It came out of the Boston region, and oh my gosh, did these teachers do it right. They used technology, they taught the kids how to use it, they got the kids out in the community, they were interviewing, they were doing social work. It was absolutely fantastic. The Khan Academy, when it came out way back when. Wow, did they know how to do it. Math, by the way, is one of the few lower level math, by the way, not higher level. The lower level math is really, really good to teach with some of these rewards. Your boring times tables, why not gamify it? They're dead boring. But English literature or absolutely not. Okay. Anything with content that you want to go deeper in, you want interactive mental experience, not interactive technological experience. So it's not negative. We just have to be very, uh, we have to be more critical. We have to be more critical. And that's where I say, the parental groups in the schools, every single school has a pack. Get together, talk to the other parents. One of the things I hate about being a psychologist is I hear the same thing coming from every single parent, and I wish I could just say, "I want a list of all your numbers," and I'm gonna connect you with each other because you're all saying the same thing. You just need to find your community. So
Yeah.
please, parents, make your community, um, and have some rules in terms of what technologies you want to permit your children and your adolescents to use, and what is just absolutely unhealthy now.
Great. Well, we're about out of time, and thank you so much for spending some time, with me today and talking about your great book, I Minds.
Mhm.
Um, where can people find more about you? Where can they?
Um, so there's a lot about the clinic at swingleclinic.com.
Mhm.
Um, there's in terms of a lot of the research and development I'm doing, that's available at swinglesonic.com. And there is, I laugh at myself. I have not updated the website in over 10 years, but the original book website is uh, drswingle.com. And that's where you'll find all the information on the book. But can I do the shameless promotion? Da,
Sure.
da, da.
Absolutely.
There it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's available in uh, uh, text, so paper. It's available in audio, and yes, it is available in the electronic versions. But I highly advise if you want to get the electronic version, don't read it after dark
Right.
because it will affect your circadian rhythm and affect your sleep cycle.
Great. Great. Thank you so much.
Really my pleasure. I really appreciate people who are disseminating this information.
Thank you for listening to Your Anxious Child. Please leave us a rating and review in iTunes to help us get the word out. If you'd like to learn more and find additional resources, visit us at edwardplimpton.com.